Welcome to the June 7th, 2019 edition of the Clemson Dubcast. Happy Friday to everyone out there. Want to give a shout out to the Clemson Calhoun Rotary Club for having me come speak to their group last week. Really fun group of people over there. They wanted to hear about the new Dabo's Dynasty book, among other things. If some of y'all out there still interested in that, those are still available. Autographed copies, just go to clemsonfootballbooks.com. You can check that out, and among the other 3 previous ones related to Clemson football. Been a little bit of a staycation this week, for me at least. Not for Paul Strelo, who has been quite busy at TigerIllustrated.com, providing all the good and juicy and informative and authoritative nuggets from Dabo Swinney's 2019 football camp. The latest piece of news, which is up on the site right now, is an update on the tight end situation at recruiting. So check it out at TigerIllustrated.com. Want to give a special shout out to the title sponsor of the Clemson Dubcast. Since all the way back in the beginning, way back in August of 2018, Parham Smith and Archenhold Law Firm, downtown Greenville. Blake Smith, he's been a good friend of mine for years, dating to the days when he taught a law class at Clemson with some guy named Terry Don Phillips. Back in this past July, when I was sort of mulling over whether to do a podcast or not, just sort of tossing around the idea, thinking about possible sponsors, Blake and Brooke Archenhold were so enthusiastic to jump on board. So happy to have them with us then, and the same is true now. The forte of their firm, which is at 15 Washington Park in Greenville, is medical negligence. They represent patients and their families in medical negligence actions. They also handle all sorts of other personal injury litigation, free consultations at Parham Smith and Archenhold Law Firm. So give them a call at 864-990-4581 or go to parhamlaw.com. That's PARHAM law.com. Want to introduce our newest sponsor to the Dubcast. Welcome to Uptown Realty, LLC. Locally owned and operated out of Sumter, but also they serve the Eastern Midlands and PD area with the buying and selling of homes, commercial properties, and land. Patrick Enzer, a friend of mine who used to cover Clemson football and work in the sports writing industry. He grew up in Anderson, going to Clemson games, been in Sumter for 15 years. Also a loyal listener to the Dubcast. Uptown Realty offers affordable new housing in the mid-130,000s from a local custom builder. Patrick is the sole owner and broker in charge. Give him a call at 803-983-5660. His website is uptownrealtysc.com. All right, we're going to get to our interview with Norm Wood of the Newport News Daily Press newspaper. We did this one by phone. Kind of hard to do it in person, given that he's, I don't know how far that is. It's a long way. But normally, when we have guests in town, we meet up over at the Abernathy Boutique Hotel. They are very kind and generous to open their one of their conference rooms. One of the times recently with Richard Yergin, they actually let us into one of their guest rooms. Super, super nice accommodations over there at the Abernathy. They had a special going. Save 10% when you book 30 days in advance. Complimentary access to the university gym. Also, pet-friendly. Did not know that. That's pretty cool for those of you with pets. Learn more about all that at theabernathy.com. All right, here we go. Wide-ranging conversation with Norm Wood of the Newport News Daily Press. Okay, here with Norm Wood. Norm, I guess it's a good time of the year when you were just telling me you were just on the phone trying to sort out plans to go see fish in Saratoga. I guess it's a good time of year when that's the source of stress and not the typical beat writer stuff stress.
You got that right, dude. I mean, it's, you could have just stopped at it. I guess it's a good time of year because it is. And it's a great time of year for folks like you and me, just because this is the rare occasion when we can actually plan to do something either with friends or family and know that we're not going to have any obstacles or hurdles to have to clear. Fingers crossed, of course. But I mean, and you can actually take real true vacation time, so as opposed to that sort of pseudo vacation where everybody has in all different professions, but the one where you go somewhere and you have to keep your eye on one thing or look over your shoulder about something going on and that you've got to address. This is just a completely disconnected from the world and having some fun with some friends type deal. So yeah, I'm excited about it. Should be fun.
You can live like a normal human this time of year.
Exactly. It's weird, man. It's really weird. So yeah, it's going to be fun. I've never been up to, I've been up to upstate New York for trips to Syracuse to see Virginia Tech and Virginia play. And that's obviously who I cover and who I spend most of my time around. But, I don't know if I've ever been up into like the Catskills and, all that kind of stuff to have some fun, and hike around and see some things and, get out in the lakes and stuff and do that. So I'm really looking forward to it, man.
I guess it was 4 years ago at this time, we were in the thick of planning for a trip to Red Rocks to see Widespread Panic.
Oh, I mean, and we still talk about it. We will until the end of time, probably. Got to do it again. Get all that whole group together again. I don't know if we ever will, but I think there's a chance that we will at least get some incarnation of that massive, 8-guy group out there. That was amazing, man. I mean, really special trip for me because I'd never been to Denver. Like I'd never been to, I had been to Colorado, but I'd never been to Denver or the greater Denver area there, Morrison, and certainly hadn't been to Red Rocks. And wow, that was, I mean, I don't know what you think, Larry, but for me, you and I are veterans of, you've performed in many concerts and seen many. And that's top 5 for me as far as concert experiences are concerned. If you lump all 3 nights together, it was pretty extraordinary.
Well, Red Rocks by itself is just it totally delivers. It's every bit of what you hear from the hype. Yeah,
I mean, because everybody that's sort of in that world calls it a destination concert venue, and it is that. It is all. I mean, it's every bit of that. I mean, you cannot overhype the place. I don't think so. It's pretty cool.
I guess we're not going to get into the details of why you missed the first set.
I knew it.
The first set of the Sunday show.
Yeah. I was going to say something about forgetting my tickets. And we talked about how, I just mentioned how both you and I are veterans of hundreds of concerts, and I promise you, I'm not kidding you. I said it those 2 days. The first 2 days, I forgot tickets.
You had to buy the second night. You had to actually buy another ticket, right?
No,
okay.
I went back.
Okay.
Yeah, but I had to go back. Like we were staying at a VRBO place. Like it was about 10 minutes away. It's an awesome place, really close, and that was fun too. And so I left the tickets there the first night, but I was able to pull it up online and. Because I'd actually purchased those. And then the second set of tickets, I think I'd gotten from a scalper or something. And so I didn't have them. And they were back at the place. So I actually got in the car, went back to the place, because we were going into the show 15 minutes before the show. Went back, got them, came back, got the same parking space I left, which was a miracle. And then missed like half the first song, I think, of the first set. So I was actually in there at a pretty decent time because we were so close. Our house was so close to the venue. And of course, by that time, everybody was in, so I didn't have to deal with traffic and any of that. But third night, I remembered. I actually remembered the tickets the third night, or third afternoon, that afternoon show on the third day. So, but yeah, I knew you weren't going to let me slide on that one.
I guess that's the positive of having to go retrieve a ticket to see one of their shows, because if you miss 20 minutes, you only miss half of a song.
As our friend Brent Jensen will tell us, that it's one song for 3 hours, in his world anyway. So but yeah, definitely that's probably true. I think they were I don't know, like halfway through a stop go or something like that. I think it was, but yeah.
All right.
It was.
So let's talk about your career. You have been at Newport News. Did you? Okay, so you went to Georgia for undergrad, right?
I did. I graduated with a couple of. I graduated in. I would have graduated in '97 with just a journalism No, that's what I'm trying to figure it out. Essentially, what worked out was I majored in journalism with an emphasis in newspapers, which makes me seem like a dinosaur now, if you say that. In '98, and then so it was the spring of '98 when I got that. I spent 5 years there, and then I told my I think it was spring of '98, maybe spring of '97. And I remember I told my parents, I was like, hey, I really think this, if I can pick up this English degree, this second degree, I think it could really help me out in the real world, pick up a second undergrad degree. I mean, that'd be huge. That'd be big. So the whole idea, obviously, was just to spend another year in Athens, So that's what I did. And I ended up with 2 undergrad degrees. And so, yeah, I was officially out of there, though, in summer of '98. So yeah, I was there from fall of '93 to summer of '98. Some pretty bad football years there, man. I mean, really. That was the Ray Goff era, the end of that era, and then the beginning of the Jim Donnan era, which was actually okay. But I was out of there by the time Donnan really got it going, So because he had a 10-win season, and I didn't experience many good football years. It was very mediocre, just a little above 500 or hovering around 500 most of the years I was there.
I remember when they beat Florida out of nowhere in '97 with Robert Edwards.
Yeah.
How just shocking it was that Georgia actually won that game.
Yep. Stunning. I mean, it stunned a lot of gamblers too, man. Vegas lost a lot of money off of that one. I remember that, but that was shocking for all of us. And, that was probably one of the, every trip to Jacksonville for that world's largest outdoor cocktail party was a blast. But that one was, just like, manna from heaven, man. Like none of the Georgia fans, even we all knew Georgia was going to get their butts kicked. And so to have that happen, if I recall, it wasn't even close. It was like 37-20 or something like that.
37-17. Yep.
Okay. Yeah. So it was pretty convincing. So that was pretty cool. So yeah. So I at that point I guess I spent 3 years working for the student paper, 2.5 years. The Red and Black covered everything, like you do in college, cross country, women's basketball, spent some time with football, obviously, and a little bit with men's basketball and gymnastics, but mostly football and women's basketball, actually, and which was a big deal down there at that time. And I moved on. The last year and a half I was down there. I actually worked for Atlanta Journal-Constitution for out of one of the bureaus, the biggest bureau at the time. They've done away with most of the bureaus now, but the biggest bureau at the time outside of the downtown bureaus in Gwinnett County. So I was covering mostly high schools there and some of the college kids that had gone on from Gwinnett County that had gone on to local schools or Georgia or Georgia Tech or whatever. And so that kept me busy, and then left there and came back to my hometown in Newport News, Virginia, where I was really lucky to hook up with the Daily Press in Newport News. And that's where I've been ever since for 21 years now. So.
And what did you start out covering there?
High schools, a couple of years, did a couple 2 years of high schools, and really, for your listeners, the 757 area code of Hampton Roads is, especially during that time, was a real hotbed of football recruiting and big time high school talent from a football and basketball standpoint. And Allen Iverson's from there, and Michael Vick was from there, and Lawrence Taylor, and there's a million names I could pull, but those are sort of the Mount Rushmore, part of the Mount Rushmore folks from around there. And so I did that for a couple of years, and then started covering Virginia Tech in 2000, which was Michael Vick's redshirt sophomore year, his last year there. And I guess I picked up the University of Virginia in 2008, along with Virginia Tech. I've covered Virginia Tech all the way through. This will be my 20th year covering them, and covered Virginia football from 2008 to 2015, along with basketball, and then I dumped Virginia football in 2016. But I've still covered Virginia Tech basketball, basically everything Virginia and Virginia Tech since 2008. Except for football, which I only covered, Virginia football, which I only covered from 2008 to 2015. So, keeps me busy, keeps me running around just like you with Clemson, and it's been a pretty fun ride.
Well, the difference between us is that the school I cover is about 4 miles down the road.
Right. Yeah.
You commute. Okay, so your tradition is or has been. I don't know if it's anything different now, but at last check, you would spend every football season. You would rent an apartment during the season in Blacksburg. You still do that?
That's it. Yeah. It's the first year. I mean, I was in 2000. The year 2000, I was 25 years old and just excited to be on a real college beat, full time. And I remember I drove my 1986 Volvo 240 GL back and forth. Actually, by that time, I think I had a Ford Explorer, but I may have driven that Volvo a little bit on some of those trips. But 2, 3, definitely 2 times a week, but sometimes 3 days a week, I'd drive back and forth from the Hampton Roads area of Virginia to Blacksburg, which is a 9-hour round trip.
Oh my gosh.
It's
4.5 hours each way?
Yeah. 4.5. Yeah. So I did that. And like I said, I was 25. So you had, endless gas in the tank, so you could do it. But, even at that point, it became quickly apparent to me that if we were going to continue to cover that as a daily beat, it just wasn't going to work. The older I got, it just was going to become more and more of a pain, and I wasn't married at the time, but at least I had enough foresight to realize that if I was married and had kids at some point down the road, that really, really wasn't going to work at all. So beginning of 2001, we started renting an apartment out there, most of the time in Blacksburg, sometimes in some of the neighboring towns like Christiansburg. And now I live in Radford, which is about 15 miles outside of town, just because I guess about 6-7 years ago, I finally realized hey, it got to be kind of creepy it's weird for me. It's kind of got to be really creepy for the college kids to see some, dude in his mid to late 30s waking up and, some college apartment, scenario and, rolling out with the 20-year-olds, to go to class and work or whatever. So, I moved a little outside of town. And so I like I said, I live about 10, 15 miles outside of town in Radford now, just for the fall. I lived there from the beginning of August, start of preseason practices till the beginning of December. And, I get back and forth now I get back and forth from Blacksburg, or should I say from Radford to home a little more often than I used to, because I've got 7-year-old twin girls. So I want them to remember what I look like other than just on, FaceTime and Skype and all that. So, but yeah, it's, that's sort of my home base, for 4 months out of the year is that sort of New River Valley area out there. And, the other 8 months of the year, I'm over by the coast in Newport News, Virginia, and, 20, 30 minutes away from the ocean front.
It's interesting. You mentioned, feeling like people are looking at you like you're a creep in a small college town, not just at your apartment complex, but, when you go downtown or something, it's just, there's a big difference, even though like Athens and Clemson and Blacksburg are all 3 college towns. There's a vast difference between Clemson / Blacksburg and Athens, in that in Athens, there's a whole entire subculture, working class, sort of 30-somethings, 40-somethings that, a community there, where it's just more cosmopolitan, I guess. Does that make sense? Where
Sure.
You don't feel as I guess, self-conscious as when you go out, in Clemson or Blacksburg.
Nothing will age you faster, man, than waking up every day and walking outside in a college town and seeing yourself age before your eyes, just because you look around and all the folks that you were just a few years away from, when you started this gig, like in my case, 20 years ago, now they as Wooderson said in Days of Confused, they get, I get older and they stay the same age. And I'm not meaning it in the way he said. That's true. It's just true. It is an absolutely true fact. They all these kids look, they're just these young, fresh-faced kids every year, and I'm getting grayer every year. So I had to get out of that scene, man. It was getting to be a little bit little bit depressing, and just, you know, it's and the other thing is, like, it's nice to be 10, 15 miles away from the college scene, because now I value my sleep far more than I used to. So not having to hear Lil Wayne on some kids, you know,
at 3:30 in the morning.
Yeah, at 3:30 in the morning, you know, a few floors up is nice, you know. So I like silence from, you know, 9 p.m. to 8 a.m. That's kind of nice. So
it's interesting, the Wooderson thing. Like, you know, if you're just looking at yourself and you live in a college town and you're like us, you know, a part of it is, man, this is great because you feel like it keeps you young.
Yeah.
But then you think of the other side is like, how do people look at me? You know, like I'm just this. I'm like
Step outside yourself.
I'm a dad. Like I'm an old man. I'm like as old as I could be their dad. Their dads,
sure,
which is depressing. So anyway,
but you're right. No, it's fun. You know, I don't want to paint this picture of it being depressing all the time, because it's not. It's great. It's awesome. And you get to live in a college town or around a college town, and things are less expensive for the most part, you know, and it's just it's a fun, vibrant, full of life type atmosphere to be in. And, people are, you know, excited about life. It's fun to be around young people who have everything ahead of them. And there's a certain enthusiasm and excitement about things that I think you just kind of naturally lose over the years, but that kind of helps keep it alive a little bit, you know, and just being around that sort of atmosphere. So that's definitely one of the positives about having that experience, you know, 4 months out of the year, which I always tell people, look, if you're going to live in Virginia, I'm the luckiest guy in the world when it comes to how my setup is, because I live in Southwest Virginia, which in the fall season, I challenge anybody to find any part of this state that's more beautiful than those mountains out there. The weather's perfect for the most part from, you know, August through the beginning or middle of November. And then it gets a little chilly. And guess what? I get out of town, you know, the beginning of December, right before it gets really ugly out there, and the snow comes. And the you know, sub 20-degree temperatures, and I head back to the coast where I'm at for, you know, the winter and the spring and the early part of the summer and the ocean front and all that. So I'm pretty lucky, man, to be able to live in the two, you know, most desirable places in the state during the most desirable portions of the time of the year to be in those places. So it's pretty cool.
So during the time of year that you're back at home in the Hampton Roads area, you're so far away, or I'm guessing that there have been instances of, like, when breaking news happens, whether it's a coach getting fired or whatever, the time element. Like, there are some times when, you know, hey, we're having this press conference in 45 minutes, I would assume. Yeah. Are there any anecdotes you can recall where you're having to both make that drive and also, like, do your job and make calls and stuff in preparation for some really sort of earth-shaking event?
That one, we've gotten really lucky because we've had the advantage in Blacksburg, at least, of working with athletic directors and staffs who kind of get it, because they're so far flung in the footprint of the ACC that they get that it's going to take some time for just about anybody to get to them. You know, I mean, I'm certain that at some point, every ACC school has done this, but I'm certain that there have been coaches or players from the ACC that have talked about how, you know, getting to Blacksburg is like trying to get to, you know, Planet Indoor. I mean, it's just way, way off the map, and they have trouble getting recruits out there for that reason. It's just so far off the beaten path. So Jim Weaver, the late Jim Weaver, and now Whit Babcock, they kind of get it. That you can't have a press conference an hour after something breaks. It's got to be the next day, or at least you got to give people 6 hours, you know, because Richmond is 3 to 3.5 hours away from Blacksburg. I'm 4.5 hours. Virginia Beach and Norfolk is 5 hours. Charlottesville is 2 hours. Roanoke is sort of the local sort of quote big city for Blacksburg, and that's 35 minutes. So it just takes a little while. Most recently, the most interesting, this didn't have anything to do with really having to get in the car and drive and make it happen while you're on the road and make phone calls and write, on the way and then cover press conference. But some of the worst scenarios for me have been when I have gone, like during the spring, for example, spring practices, as is the case with most schools these days. Access is restricted, obviously, and coaches want to have an iron fist with how they, sort of control, when their kids are talking, and who they're talking to, and all that. So, springtime in Blacksburg, you'll usually get 1 or 2 days during the course of a week where you'll have media availability. You'll never get to see practice in Blacksburg. It just doesn't happen. So we will go, or for example, I've made trips to Blacksburg during the spring, 4.5 hour drive out there, sit down for 20 to 30 minutes of interviews. If I'm not writing that day, which is pretty rare, I'll usually write while I'm out there. But there are been some times where if I'm not writing that day, I'll get right back in the car and drive another 4.5 hours back home.
Oh man.
So essentially I was out there for 20 to 30 minutes of work that I couldn't get because they're not streamed something for some reason. You can watch a lot of these things. They'll stream a lot of these athletic, opportunities, interview opportunities, but you can't ask a question. I can't get, my story angle covered unless I'm out there. So that's happened a few times. The other scenario that just happened in April, you probably know where I'm going with this, was when Buzz Williams got, we all saw it, we all saw it coming down the line, but we just didn't know when the timing of all this was going to happen. And Buzz Williams gets hired. I'm in Minneapolis, covering the University of Virginia in the Final Four. And obviously there's not many spare moments or free time there. So I guess the day of the championship game, I think it was, Buzz Williams, I guess maybe a week earlier, had been hired by Texas A&M, hired away from Virginia Tech, which we all saw coming. The day of the championship game, the national championship game, Virginia Tech has its press conference to announce Mike Young as its new men's basketball coach. Wow. So I'm covering the hiring of Mike Young that morning from 2,500 miles away, or what is it, 1,500 miles away, or whatever it is up there in Minneapolis, and covering it, via live stream on the internet and trying to color whatever I can by calling, phone calls and, run down this person, that person, write that story until mid-afternoon, and then head right over to the arena to cover the national championship game. So that was a day I'll never forget. But that's the way it is these days. It's these, if they're going to cover more than one beat, you're going to have a scenario like that where it kind of worlds collide. But the spring practice thing is the biggest. That's the most depressing thing where something like it. And there's been myriad basketball games where I've gotten in the car, covered the game, turned around, gotten back on the road at 11 o'clock at night and driven 4.5 hours back home again, So that's happened several times. We don't do that as much anymore, but it's happened many, many times where that's happened too. So it's just the way it is. I don't expect anybody to feel sorry for me. It's just the way it is.
Big supporter of Clemson athletics and now a loyal supporter of the Clemson Dubcast is Harris Flooring America. Based in Anderson, South Carolina, Harris Flooring has been instrumental in a lot of the facilities transformation you've seen on Clemson's campus lately. From the Allen Reeves Center to the McFadden Building to Memorial Stadium to the Neary Center, Harris Flooring has been at the ground floor, pun intended, of all this. Family owned and operated since 1947. The owner, Scott Junkins, big Clemson guy. He employs Clemson folks. And keep in mind, it's not just commercial. Harris Flooring is just as good inside the home in the residential realm as they are with the larger scale commercial stuff, floor to ceiling design capabilities, give them a call, 864-642-6183, or online at flooringamerica-anderson.com. Okay, the one of the reasons I wanted to have you on is just to talk about the whole evolution of the Clemson Virginia Tech, football story as it relates to all the way back in the late 90s when Virginia Tech really took advantage of a floundering Clemson program, 37-0 in 98. They came down to Death Valley, delivered that shellacking. Then in 99, the same year, Virginia Tech played for the national title, 31-11 in Blacksburg. Then in 2000 in the bowl game, I guess you probably covered that one, 41-20 with Michael Vick.
Woody Dantzler.
Yep. And against Woody Dantzler. And then 06, I think we stayed with you for that one. A couple of us writers.
Oh yeah.
Thursday night game, 24-7, and then 07, 41-23 in Death Valley. I remember distinctly a number of folks from the Clemson side during those times saying, Virginia Tech is who we should aspire to be,
Right.
That kind of blue collar type of program that maximizes its resources, that might not necessarily draw top 5 classes, but that gets really good development and really good coaching. From 04 to 2011, Virginia Tech in the ACC was 56-13 with 4 ACC titles. Then over the last 7 seasons in the ACC, 31-26, no titles, and 1 ACC championship game appearance. We all know what Clemson has become in the last few years. How do you explain? I guess we could call it a plummet for Virginia Tech to the current stature of the last 7-8 years. What did they just stagnate when it was? I guess, and it was hard to notice that they were stagnating until maybe it was too late. What's your take on how that happened?
Yeah, and then part of that was the end of the Frank Beamer era. Obviously, the last 4 or 5 years of his tenure, or 4 years, should I say, they were hovering around, always a little over 500 and 7-6 or 8-5. And that was sort of the norm for a while. And I do think that there was some stagnation there. They were also going through some staff changes where that was unusual, for years, for 10, 12 years. Virginia Tech lost nobody on staff. I mean, they just kept everybody together, which is unheard of. It's just unheard of to keep a full staff together for as long as they did. And then all of a sudden you started to have really the only turnover they had was at the offensive coordinator position, and much to the consternation of a lot of Virginia Tech fans, Brian Steinspring wasn't the answer there. And he had a few good years, and then obviously they made another switch when Justin Fuente came in, and that was a wholesale change. But I think that there were a lot of things that went on recruiting wise during that period of time too, in the last 4 years of especially Beamer's tenure, where a lot of the traditional hotbeds of recruiting for Virginia Tech, I mentioned the Hampton Roads area of Virginia, which includes Norfolk and Virginia Beach and Chesapeake and Newport News and Hampton, Williamsburg, places like that. Always been a traditional hotbed, always been a place that they've been able to go in some years to assemble as much as 50% of their team. You look at 50% of their roster almost, or at least 40%. They've been from some of the schools in that area. Richmond has always been a big spot, clearly, and then Northern Virginia. Well, for that era from 1995 to about 2010, Virginia Tech just owned those areas, and they just locked them down. Obviously, University of Virginia was going through mostly a lull at that point. They had some good years with Grow between 2000 and 2010. But then, obviously, with Mike London, it just had one good year, and all the rest of those seasons were mediocre at best. But Virginia Tech just owned those areas. But then, all of a sudden, by 2010, 2011, you've got, Florida State starting to infiltrate quite a bit. Penn State coming down, grabbing a lot of those recruits. North Carolina started to get more of a presence in those areas. So Virginia Tech's got new spots where they're having to compete. They've got new competition for places that they rarely had before. And then Virginia Tech starts to try to make inroads in North Carolina. So basically, you're going through a sort of a paradigm shift with recruiting, where Virginia Tech has to change its frame of mind and its way of thinking, because now you've got programs that are starting to infiltrate the traditional hotbeds. So you're going to other areas and trying to establish themselves in different spots. And while the staff is turning over quite a bit, they went through some turnover at the quarterback position too, with Logan Thomas, giving way to Michael Brewer, and they had some success there prior with, for all his troubles. Marcus Vick was a nice quarterback. Obviously, Tyrod Taylor was an all ACC caliber quarterback. Sean Glennon, for all his ups and downs, when he was on, he was really good, really accurate thrower, but just inconsistent. And then, of course, Michael Vick before all that. So, they started to go through some inconsistencies there. And then Justin Fuente comes in, and he's trying to establish something brand new, obviously, and a whole new offensive philosophy. So they just went through a lot of transition, I think, from a recruiting standpoint, a philosophical standpoint, and obviously from a coaching standpoint. You put all that together, and clearly teams like Clemson, who's been the cream of the crop in the country, along with Alabama, and keeping Dabo there for all those years and being able to establish their recruiting ties. They've been able to sneak up and catch Virginia Tech and far surpass them.
I mean, thinking back to that 2007 game in Death Valley, Tech just punked Clemson for the second year in a row. I want to say the score at halftime was like 31-9 or something.
And remind me, was that the game where I think 3 of Virginia Tech's first 4 scores were defensive special teams?
Yes.
I think.
Yes.
True Beamer ball.
Yes.
That was the quintessential Beamer ball victory.
They had a punt return for touchdown, interception return, I believe, and then maybe a kickoff return. Anyway,
interception return, I think, too. I know that.
So the second half of that game, Clemson racked up a bunch of passing yards, but still lost by 18 points. And yet, I distinctly remember this, it was almost like a moral victory for some Clemson folks. They were like, man, Colin Harper looked great in that second half, and we're turning the corner.
And we scored 23 points against a Bud Foster defense.
Yes. And then 4 years later, Clemson goes to Blacksburg. Everybody thinks Virginia Tech is going to win that game. Mm-hmm. And 23-3, I mean, that was a cataclysmic event.
Yeah.
And then fast forward a couple months after
Thursday night, too, if I remember correctly. That was which is hallowed ground in Lane Stadium. I think that was a Thursday night game where they came in and just whacked Virginia Tech.
And then just a few months later, they play again in the ACC championship game, and almost no one thought Clemson was going to win that one because they had just gotten hammered by South Carolina and NC State the previous 2 weeks. Yeah, so it was almost like that game in Charlotte, and then again a year later when Virginia Tech came to Clemson and Clemson laid the wood. That was really the sort of the passing of the torch, not just to Clemson per se, but Virginia Tech was definitely giving it up over to the Atlantic Division to both Clemson and Florida State.
Yeah, it's funny because I do remember that ACC championship game. I remember Virginia Tech was number 5 in the country coming into that game, which, that like you said, that was the game where, everybody assumed Tech was going to get revenge and for losing just a few weeks earlier to Clemson by what was 20 points. I think it was 23-3. I think in that game.
In Blacksburg, and then the one in the championship, I think, was 37-38-10.
38-10, I think it was.
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah, and if I remember correctly, it was tied or somebody was up by field goal at the half, and then Clemson went nuts in the third quarter and pulled away. But that was a really, you talk about, and you covered all the, you talked about all the games, but that was such a volatile era because you going back to that, you mentioned that 2006 game, which I think was a Thursday night affair in Blacksburg too. And Thursday nights in Blacksburg is sort of, that's, as is most places, but that's, Virginia Tech was sort of one of the first, if not the first, for ESPN to sort of jump on with this Thursday night. Thursday night games have just become the norm over the years, obviously, but that, fans are always really well lubed up and ready to go hours in advance. And that was a Thursday night game, that 2006 game in Blacksburg. But I remember it being a big deal because Clemson, I know, was a top 10 team, maybe number 10, number 9 or number 10. And that was James Davis and C.J. Spiller, that backfield. And Virginia Tech was not ranked, even though they had a pretty good record, 5-1, 6-1, somewhere around there. And again, Clemson was expected to run all over a Bud Foster defense because that was really the first big challenge of the season for Virginia Tech. And Virginia Tech won by 17 points. And it really wasn't even that close. I remember that, but everything started to change just in the span of a year. That's like you said, that 2007 season is when, 2007, I guess, is when, 2011 was what you were talking about with the 2 wins by Clemson and that one, that, like we mentioned, the big win in Blacksburg and the big ACC championship win. But things started to slowly sort of evolve over those next 5 years. And to that point, you could see it building. And it is funny to look at, 13 years ago after that loss in Blacksburg, where, James Davis and C.J. Spiller just got shut down. And to hear Clemson fans saying that's who we want to be. We want to be that kind of defense, and to try to hold Virginia Tech up on a pedestal as the class of the ACC, which they were at the time. But Virginia Tech, I think that was the same. If I'm not mistaken, it was either 2006 or 2007. I get my years mixed up, but that was the year also that they lost to Boston College on the heartbreaking Matt Ryan touchdown pass, where Virginia Tech, if they had won that game, they're squarely in the BCS championship conversation as one of the number 2 or 3 teams in the country. And again, we're just talking about 11, 12, 13 years ago, but man, everything is that's as close as Virginia Tech would get to returning to the national championship game like they were in 1999. But since then, it's since that 2011 years, like you said, Clemson has just taken off.
Let's talk about the sort of boots on the ground perception of Justin Fuente up there, because I know that his first year, you get to the ACC championship, and I know the view from this side was, wow, man, he is doing a really good job, and it's not going to be long before he has them back. I mean, they gave Clemson all they could handle in 16 in Orlando. But since then, you've had all that attrition a year ago, all those players leaving for one reason or another, and then I guess they were 6-7 this past season.
Yeah.
What is the feel of things, sort of where they are and where they're heading into year 4 under Fuente?
With the transfer thing, I think that was more of it ended up being, I mean, at the time, it was very alarming for sure to see 11 players in the transfer portal at one time, 11 players that we knew of. There's speculation that there may have been sort of a secret player or two that was, kind of, loitering around the opening of the transfer portal and never really placing both feet in there and all that, and maybe sort of, shadow surfing some other options, but in any case, there were 11 that were confirmed, and yeah, a lot, but really, honestly, not that compared to some other top programs. They were sort of at least in the neighborhood of the number of guys that were in the transfer portal for some other top programs. And that's the thing, though. It was just alarming, I think, from the standpoint of Virginia Tech, because, like you said, they were 6-7. We're not talking about a top program anymore. We're talking about programs trying to get back to where they were, as you mentioned, in Fuente's first year when he was 10-4 and 9-4 in the second season, and things were starting to click, it seemed like. But as it turned out, a lot of those guys they ended up coming back. I mean, they lost Eric Kuma. That's a big loss. That was their number 2 receiver last year. He ended up at Old Dominion. They lost Josh Jackson, obviously. The guy started quarterback a couple seasons ago, and he transferred to Maryland. And Sean Savoy was a receiver that they lost. He was really nice his freshman year 2 seasons ago, and then kind of vanished last year. So he moved on to Maryland also. It was close to his hometown. And, but they got Deshaun McCleese back, which in a backfield where they're going to have some help. And they can afford to lose many people back there because they're not terribly deep as it is. They're going to depend on a couple freshmen this year too to maybe make some noise, along with Jalen Holston, who's a returning guy. But Deshaun McCleese will help. He's back. He kind of explored some things. Experienced guy. And they lost a few other guys that were sort of deep backups. Rico Kearney was a linebacker that they kind of had their eye on as maybe able to make some noise down the road, but he was a redshirt freshman last year and sort of getting his feet wet, and he moved on too. But Josh Jackson, you say, yeah, he's a starting quarterback from a couple of seasons ago, but he was, the way Ryan Willis played, replacing him last year. And with Quincy Patterson, the stud freshman that played some last year, and they expect to play and challenge Willis this year, it was debatable whether Josh Jackson was going to win that starting job back again after he came back from a broken fibula that he suffered in the third game of the season last year. So maybe not a massive loss there. Point being, once you take all of these transfers and the guys that actually left the program, you take stock in all of them. I don't know if many of them were really massive losses other than Eric Kuma at receiver, and a tight end also that ended up at Old Dominion. Chris Cunningham, he'd started a couple times too, but they're deep at tight end and H-back. That's one of their deeper spots, actually. So I think it was alarming to people initially to see all this going on because they had come off such a poor season, really, really poor defensively. It was historically bad. Not just for Bud Foster, but also for Virginia Tech. Stunning how bad they were defensively, even though I think we all knew that they were going to drop off with all the starters that they lost from the previous season, 9 starters, and then the injuries they suffered. They had like 22 different starters on the defensive side last year. So all those things I think were more alarming maybe than the transfer things ended up being, just because, like I said, a few of those guys started, decided to come back. And a lot of the big, when you look at it, a lot of the big names that actually left are guys that are replaceable, and they've got some depth at some of those spots. But I think there is an uneasy feeling because when you break a streak of, 25 consecutive years where you've had winning records, and it goes back to early in the Beamer era, that's certainly an indication you're headed the wrong direction. But with the schedule they have coming up this coming season, especially the home slate, it's horrible. I mean, it is horrible, Larry. I mean, it's like it's one of the worst schedules that they'll have played at home in decades. I mean, they've got two FCS teams at home, and that's a product of losing East Carolina and all that pissing and moaning that was going on between the two of them last year after the hurricane wiped out that game. And so they had to scramble to find somebody to replace that. So they've got 7, almost every game at home is winnable. The road slate's a little more challenging. They got to go to Notre Dame, got to go to Miami. But it's totally conceivable, I think, that they can win 8 games this year, especially with as weak as that offense, that the home slate is. So I do think that if they end up, hovering around 500 again, you've got a coach that's going to be on the hot seat in 2020. I don't think it would take something, truly catastrophic for him to be sort of looked at as a guy that they need to replace this season. I think it would take a 3-9, 4-8 type year for people to sort of start those kinds of rumblings. But I think if they finish around 500 or so, even with the what they've got coming back and coming off a 6-7 season, he will feel some heat in 2020. But again, I think they've got a chance to be an 8-win team or so, just based on the fact they've got some cupcakes on that schedule.
That home schedule, I'm looking at it. Old Dominion,
horrible.
Furman, Duke, Rhode Island, North Carolina, Wake Forest, Pitt. What's the biggest? Yeah. What's the best game of what?
Probably Pitt. I mean, North Carolina's horrible last year. I mean, I don't, it's a really, really bad schedule at home, especially. I mean, like I said, there's some tough games on the road. I mean, listen, Virginia's going to be good. Georgia Tech is always a pain in the butt for Virginia Tech, and it'll be challenging this year because now you're switching out of that option. And they're going to have to study exactly what they switch from or switch into, and then at Notre Dame, clearly that'll be tough first weekend in November. So and at Miami, I guess that first weekend in October. So not only do they play, and they open at Boston College. And Boston College looked good last year. I mean, that's a challenging opener.
Yeah.
So not only you look at it. I mean, they okay, great. They've got some challenges on the road, but after they play Miami, October 5th, they don't play another road game for a month. I mean, they don't go to Notre Dame for a month. So, it's a doable schedule, put it that way. Especially with the games you ticked off at home. It's embarrassing. For Virginia Tech to. I think they're going to have a major dip in season ticket sales this year.
Norm, what is it like covering Fuente just from a media perspective, just dealing with him, and then compared to Frank Beamer, dealing with him? What was it like dealing with Frank?
Yeah, it's different, man. But a lot of this is just changing. I mean, a lot of this is just because I'm an old guy now, I mean, when I first started covering Virginia Tech, everything was open, man. I mean, back in 2000, it was a Wild West. Just go, watch every minute of practice, be on the field for every, it made it more, necessary for me to be out there, essential for me to be out there every minute of, the fall. Because again, you could, be at every practice, watch every minute, no social media presence, no Twitter, no Instagram, not even Facebook. You could grab who you wanted after practice. We'd spend after every single practice up to 30 minutes to 45 minutes out on the field talking with people, which, it got dark out there, by the time we were done. That kind of slowly, gradually, that we got the reins pulled on us with that. But even under Beamer, it was still a situation where even at its worst, we had a situation where we'd be able to have a day where we could request whoever we wanted in terms of players and have them come into a room and spread out over, fan out over this huge room and just go where you wanted. Talk to players in a corner, have a little one-on-one, if you found a player off by himself, and again, there were no restrictions on who you could ask for. And Frank Beamer always had an open door policy with his assistant coaches where you could just walk into the football offices, wander down the hallway and knock on the door of a coach. And if he wasn't busy, just sit down for a few minutes. That's all gone. It's just, and I don't think that's just Virginia Tech. I think that's just the way it is with a lot of schools these days. So yeah, it's a lot different now with Fuente in there. It's not to say that he's a jerk by any stretch. He's he's just a lot tighter. He keeps sort of a really close watch on which players he cuts loose for interviews and which ones he gives access to. And there's not an awful lot of rhyme or reason for it. Sometimes it's just kind of left to his whim. And in some cases where we'll make a request for a player or assistant coach and it'll go through the sports information department. But Fuente signs off on it, on every single one of the requests. So he micromanages the request quite a bit. But having said all that, when you can get Justin, in a mood, he'll get into X's and O's, with you a little bit, and doesn't like to talk an awful lot about injuries, but he's not unlike a lot of coaches these days in that regard. So he won't give you a lot of insight into that. And the perspective of having worked with Frank Beamer and now working with Justin Fuente is that you're not going to find, and this is almost cliche at this point to say that you're not going to find coaches like Frank Beamer anymore. It's true. You're not going to find him. He's all the image of the folksy sort of down home, maybe even grandfatherly type coach at times is gone now. Frank Beamer is gone. He was as approachable and as cordial as you could want to find in a coach. Bill Snyder, I guess would have maybe fallen into that category too, of sort of that elder statesman type. But Fuente is all business all the time, and he's willing to go off the record with you a little bit. He'll do that, maybe a couple times a year as sort of a put on the media bone. But he is not the jerk he comes across as when you get a chance to sort of talk with him like a real person, but he's a lot tighter and a lot keeps things closer to the vest than Frank does. And you gotta work for opportunities with players and assistant coaches, whereas in the past it was just, like I said, a free for all in a lot of the early years there, and turn of the century with Frank Beamer, and got a little tighter over the years, but still was a lot more open than it has been with Coach Fuente.
So harder to develop a relationship with Fuente, I guess, than his predecessor.
Yeah, for sure. And that's just I think a lot of that is just not so much Fuente, but I think he's taken lessons from other coaches, and how to sort of rein it in and part of it is certainly controlling the message. I mean, there's a lot of that going on for sure, but again, that's all coaches these days. But some of it is, I think most of it is just rooted in wanting to know and really have his hands in all portions of what's going on with what his players are saying and what his consistent coaches are saying, and doesn't like to. He likes everybody to be on the same page. That's for sure. And they've been caught, sort of in situations where they weren't on the same page as far as personnel is concerned and how they plan to deploy certain people. And it was pretty clear that some coaches weren't in the same meeting. When you ask a couple different coaches, and that's just minor things. But it is very much an effort to run a tight ship, and a much tighter ship anyway than it was when Frank Beamer was there. But again, Fuente, I wouldn't say is any kind of jerk. He certainly doesn't come across as that, but he's just not quite as open and doesn't let the assistant coaches and players do the speaking for him nearly as much as Frank might have.
I assume you can be a little more forthcoming about Buzz Williams now that he's gone. What was he like?
A lot of it was self-promotion, and that, I think that's kind of the overwhelming characteristic that you come to glean from, any kind of interaction with Buzz Williams, is that he is very much about promoting his product and his method of doing things. And you're going to have to sit and listen to a lot of the life lesson coach, the guy who wants to give you the life lessons. That's him. I mean, he's that guy. And a lot of it's repeated messages over and over again, because his message is very much geared toward a TV audience. So a beat writer may hear the same story or the same thing or the same message about how he wants to coach his kids and handle his kids, 10 times, 15 times during the course of the season, because again, he knows that when he gets in front of a TV audience, he's not getting the same set of eyes on him all the time. So, it comes across a little disingenuous, to be perfectly honest with you, a lot of times. Impossible to get him on the phone, will not do one-on-ones. unless, you know, you have the letters CBS or ESPN or, you know, FOX, you know, in front of your name, you know, on your business card. He very much likes a national audience. Openly mentioned how he did not care to develop a relationship with the local beat writers because, quote, he didn't read things, you know, for that were mentioned, which is funny because several times he did mention several things that were written by beat writers just in passing, not crediting any of the beat writers, but just sort of mentioning them. So, you know, having said all that, you know, he was a fascinating personality to cover. I mean, just a really interesting person. It was just unfortunate we didn't get to know more about that person, you know, because then a lot of that was by choice from him. And, you know, it's sad in a lot of ways that there was a lot more there I felt like could have been mined, but just didn't want to offer it because he was so sort of geared toward promoting his own message, and which again I found disingenuous a lot of times, and not so much offering an opportunity to get to know his players even a little better, which I thought was a great disservice to fans who wanted to know more about the program and certainly wanted to know more about the players, and you just didn't get that opportunity with Buzz. Having said all that, the guy's a fantastic coach. I mean, really, really good X's and O's guy. I don't know if you'll find another out of bounds play, side out of bounds play coach who's better in the whole nation. I mean, he's great scoring off of those plays and defending them as well. And that's a big part of it, obviously, late in games is getting, you know, hidden points. And he's great at big time into analytics, very well studied with all that, and really, really dives deep into that and employs it in his coaching style. And again, a great coach, but not great from an access or from an access standpoint, or from you know, in terms of being forthcoming and sort of open with media. That's not his game.
It's interesting you mentioned the dichotomy between how Buzz and other coaches, admittedly, view the national media outlets like, come on in, rolling out the red carpet.
Oh, yeah.
And then they view the local guys with disdain. You know, I've heard other stories about Buzz, just how hard he is to cover, you know, from the local guys. But then just a few weeks ago, I heard Mark Packer, the noted Sirius XM radio host, say, man, Buzz Williams, one of the greatest guys you're ever going to meet, just such a nice guy. And I just had to laugh. Not that that's not true in Mark's case, but that there is that just sharp contrast between the relationship part between the national and local.
I think he comes across that way too. I really do think he comes across that way with the national guys because they don't have daily interaction with them. You know, I mean, if you're dealing with the guy that you have to see, you know, 3 or 4 days a week, or at least twice a week during the season, you see a lot of repetitive, you know, you know what the message is about, you know why he's saying the message, and you know the audience he's interested in providing that message to. But it's not us, you know. I mean, he really couldn't care less about local media. It's just, you know, I would stop short of calling it adversarial, but he does kind of approach that sort of level at times, for sure, certainly with some media in particular, but he is not real. I know, you know, Mike Barber from the Richmond Times-Dispatch and certainly Mark Berman from the Roanoke Times have some really negative stories to share about him. I didn't care for him all that much, to be honest with you, just because I didn't understand why he couldn't return texts at times. He would go through phases where you could get, you know, have nice text conversations with him, certainly in the off season, but during the season, a lot of times he just went dark on you. I mean, this is a guy who didn't do, you know, the only times you could ever catch him, since he didn't answer his phone, was sporadic in returning texts, was after games and on the ACC men's basketball coaches teleconference once a week during the season, which I understand they may do away with this coming season. So if you don't get Buzz Williams after games, you're not going to talk to the guy from a media standpoint, so from a local media standpoint. But again, Mark Packer, the national guys, yeah, I'm sure he comes across as a great guy because you're not hearing the stories for the 20th time, and you know you're getting sort of this version of him that's very approachable, very sort of down home country type, guy, and fascinating to listen to. There is that. I mean, he is that at all times, pretty much. But a lot of it is just, again, repetitive, and if you hear it every day, you just kind of, or every time you speak with him, it loses a lot of its. It seems disingenuous after a while when you realize that the message is the same, a lot of times. This is not, there are some, listen, could we have taken different approaches with him? Certainly. Is it sometimes our fault for maybe being a little too aggressive? I don't know. Maybe. I mean, that's kind of our job, but, it could have been better. It could have been a better relationship between Buzz and the local media during his time in Blacksburg. I'd be interested to see what the College Station folks have to say after a year or two. I know there were similar stories from Marquette media about how he was up there. So it doesn't sound like it was anything new. But again, great coach, man. Awesome coach. I mean, he knows what he's doing on the floor, man.
Well, and also, Mark Packer's not asking Buzz, 5 times a week, hey, how is such and such's sprained ankle? Mark's saying, hey, great win the other day, coach. Talk about that. So it's a totally different set of questions and responsibilities. So, Mike Young, have you managed to get a feel for him so far?
A little bit, just preliminarily. He's been I think a lot of it has been, I've requested twice, just either meet and greets or one-on-ones with him, and I'm not getting the sense that it's so much Mike Young. Maybe it is. It's hard to say. I think we're getting a little bit of pushback or stonewall a little bit from the sports information department at Virginia Tech, and they may be protecting him a little bit, giving him an opportunity to get his feet on the ground and all that. But we've been told, I think collectively, that this is the month when he's going to start to reach out a little bit more and get back to some media. But I will say this, he has returned texts a couple times, and I've introduced myself, once and had a very specific conversation with him about something else. And another time, that's again saying more than you can say for his predecessor at times. Though again, like I said, I had some nice off-season conversations via text with Buzz, but Mike Young comes with a reputation for being very open, very much, hey, come knock on my door and say hello type guy. And we'll see if that stands once we get into the October, November, and certainly December of the season, the ACC slate. But he does seem like he's got a little different approach than what Buzz brought. But you're after spending 30 years at Wofford and 17 as a head coach, you're talking about a quantum leap, up to the ACC. So we'll see how much the pressure starts to affect him. And this is going to be a tough season, I got to think, just because, especially if they lose Kerry Blackshear, who's in the transfer portal right now, second team All ACC forward last year, and he's got one season left as a graduate transfer wherever he goes, or if he stays at Tech. But I understand he's visiting Florida right now. He's looked at Kentucky, Texas A&M could be in the mix for Kerry Blackshear. Could go play for Buzz again, and I've also heard UNC might be in the mix too. So if you lose him, that's a big piece you're missing, and they're going to be fairly young as it is. So you could use a really nice veteran piece like that. So we'll see how that affects Mike Young's relationship with us. But I'm encouraged with what I've seen so far, and I'm really looking forward to actually getting to sit down with him and know him a little bit more.
Longtime sponsor of the Clemson Dubcast is Tandem Payment, company headquartered in Greenville, South Carolina, and headed up by a Clemson graduate, 2005. The newest program Tandem offers gives business owners an opportunity to eliminate up to 100% of your annual credit card processing fees. The best part, it encourages more transactions inside your business. Plus, you save the typical processing fees you pay annually. Call Tandem today to learn more about how to eliminate your credit card processing fees. Want to learn more? Visit tandempayment.com today. So once upon a time, you did a newspaper article on Bruce Hornsby's son, who played lacrosse and then developed a relationship with Bruce himself.
Yeah, no, he's a basketball guy.
Basketball, I'm sorry. I don't know why I thought it was lacrosse.
His actually he's got two sons. He's got one Russell, who ran track at Oregon, obviously got a pretty good rep for a track program out there. I believe he was a middle distance guy and a really nice athlete. And now I believe he's acting out in L.A. And his other son, Keith Hornsby, is the kid that I wrote about. And Keith played at my high school alma mater briefly for a year or two, I think. Hampton Roads Academy in Newport News, Virginia. And then he moved on to the storied, prestigious Oak Hill Academy program out in Southwest Virginia, which has produced, dozens of NBA players and draft picks. He played for that program, started a little bit, and went on to UNC Asheville from there, where he had a really nice start to his career and transferred to LSU. And now he's playing in the G League, I believe, with the Dallas Mavericks organization. So he's made a career out of it so far and trying to work his way up. And at the time I wrote about Keith was when he was transitioning from UNC Asheville to LSU, I believe. So, and I got to talk a little bit with Bruce Hornsby. And as it turns out, Bruce ended up being sort of Keith's media agent, more or less. I mean, he would, every time I wanted to talk to Keith, if I couldn't get Keith on the phone, I could get Bruce Hornsby on the phone. I mean, it's the weirdest thing. It's like the reverse. It's like Bizarro world. You kind of think it was the reverse. If I was asking Keith, can I talk to your dad? But not. The dad was the one that, for a stretch there, we were having once or twice a week for over the course of maybe seemed like a month and a half, we were having like 45-minute conversations about everything,
wow.
Man. We were talking about Keith. We were talking about because he's a huge hoop head, man. He loves basketball. Big, giant basketball fan. I saw him at UVA games a few times, and he'd show up at OU games every now and again, and Old Dominion games. And so we talked about that. We talked about his time with the Grateful Dead. We talked about his relationship with various artists. We talked about his relationship with Warren Haynes. We've talked about Widespread Panic. We've talked about his future plans in music. He told me a few things about his bandmates with the Noisemakers. His band Now. Yeah, he revealed a few things to me that hadn't been released to the public yet, because we got to a point where we were sort of in a relationship where he trusted me a little bit about some stuff, because he knew I was a guy that was, I was just soaking up all the music, knowledge and stories and, trivia and all that he was dropping on me. And it was fun, man. It was a real fun little stretch. Now, every now and again, we're not talking all the time now. We'll probably share a text or two once or twice a year, and 2 or 3 times a year probably. So I probably text with him now every 4 to 6 months, I'd say. And it's more or less just a, hey, hope you're doing all right, or hey, hope Keith's all right, or hey, I heard this project you were working on, and I heard it on satellite radio, sounds good. And he'll respond with a little something, and we'll go back and forth for a few minutes. But that was cool. That was a really cool experience. But just not often you write a story about a 19, 20-year-old kid and end up being able to form a sort of loose relationship with his Grammy award-winning dad. So,
no doubt.
Pretty cool. Especially as a Dead fan too, getting to talk to a former, Dead keyboardist. I mean, that's pretty awesome, man.
So, all right, last but definitely not least, maybe the best part of the interview here, Randy King, former. Oh
man, this could go anywhere. With Randy, yeah.
Former Roanoke Times, Virginia Tech beat writer. His stories were such legend that I remember writing blogs about Randy. Period. Particularly, I think one that comes to mind is at the ACC football kickoff. I think it was in Pinehurst. He set on fire a Virginia Tech player who was.
I was there.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Let's start with that one, I guess.
Well, this should not come as any kind of surprise to anybody, to any of your listeners, but there, in addition to opportunities, off-season opportunities with coaches, some football coaches, and a few of the stud players on each team, there are a few drinks consumed. There's some alcoholic beverages consumed at these ACC football kickoff events. I know it's shocking that you might have a group of sports reporters around and that imbibe a bit. But
and on top of that, it's free.
It's free, exactly. It's free.
Open bar. So yes.
Come on, So anyway, it was the first night of the event, I guess, is a 2-night thing or 2-day thing. And the first night is the night when people, get loose a little bit sometimes. And we were out on Pinehurst is, by reputation, beautiful. It's just a gorgeous place. You've been there. You've been there, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's just in the clubhouse, and they set up the little hospitality area for media and stuff. Right there on that veranda, sort of on the side of that main clubhouse there. As you drive up, and it's just an unbelievable setting. So here we are. We're all out there having a few drinks, and it's getting late. It's up past 11 o'clock or so. And Carlton Powell, who was a starting defensive tackle at the time for Virginia Tech, came out and just decided to brave the. We rarely get visits in the media hospitality area from players, or certainly, a coach may stop by every now and again, but players don't pop by every much. But something about this event, there were a lot of players who were floating around and up at all hours of the night, and maybe stumbling around the hallways and Pinehurst a little bit. So they got off the rails a little bit with some of these players, but it was a fun atmosphere, and nobody got in any trouble or anything. It was just a fun time. And so Carlton came out, and maybe he was an upperclassman, certainly 21, 22 at that time. I think he had a few, maybe not. I think he certainly was not, he wasn't drunk or even staggering or anything like that. It was just, social. So, Randy, I think if I remember correctly, he was standing behind Carlton Powell, who had just a stark white shirt on, and Randy used one of the candles on the table to light a cigarette. And he's standing just inches away behind Carlton, and as he used the candle to light the cigarette, the candle kind of flamed up a little bit, and it grabbed the back of Carlton's shirt and it was like you put a piece of balsa wood in a blazing inferno. It just flash fire left a giant gaping hole in the middle of Carlton Powell's back. Didn't burn him. I remember we stamped it out, and people were pouring water on it and all that. And, it's hilarious because the guy wasn't hurt. But it could have been tragic. But. That's a Randy King story for all time, right? That's certainly one of the top 10 Randy King stories in a career full of them. I mean, that's a Hall of Famer right there.
We're going to go ahead and skip the Jacksonville adult establishment workers who were we'll just say visiting Randy in his hotel room, and his car ended up missing. We'll skip over that one. Maybe we'll have him on a podcast and he can tell that story himself. But the number,
he's worth it. He's a great dude, man. We're talking about one of the legendary great people and storytellers, and even more than half of them are true, I'd say. So
the Bronco Nagurski story seems kind of family friendly, podcast family friendly. Do you remember that one? He was in Charlotte, right? Where Corey Moore?
Sure. Yeah, I think it was in New York.
New York.
I think that ceremony was in New York. So, and if I remember the story correctly, because this was a little before my time, but I've heard the story many, many times over the years. It was like a year before I started on the beat. Not even months. It was the tail end of that 99 season where Tech went to the national championship game, lost to Florida State. Corey Moore, of course, was the stud defensive end on that team and an All-American, and great player. And he won the Bronco Nagurski Award that year, which is given of course, to the top defensive player in the country. And a lot of people, I guess, call it the defensive Heisman. But anyway, it was in New York because that was the whole deal. So Corey and Randy King, also AKA Nappy King. Corey and Nappy, that's his longtime nickname, has been since he was a college kid at Radford. So they developed a relationship over the years because Nappy is a giant personality. Corey Moore was a giant personality also, and they got together and they were great. They're great together. It was one of the few times, from my understanding, where if you saw Nappy and you saw Corey Moore together, media would gather around them just to listen to those two have conversations. So, which is a rarity. Most of us get in there, want to get our stuff, get done, get in, move on, so we can write and move to the next book, whatever. So anyway, that was the kind of relationship those two had. So when Nappy went up to New York to watch the ceremony where Corey Moore received the Bronco Nagurski trophy, which is an impressive trophy. It's like a 40-pound trophy. That's important. That comes into play here. Bronze trophy. Corey said, "Hey man, you drove up here, right?" Nappy said, "Yeah, I drove." So he said, "Look, I don't want to carry this thing on the plane." Corey says to Nappy, "I don't want to carry this trophy with me on the plane. I'm afraid they might make me get an extra seat, for a 40-pound trophy. Would you mind, since you drove, putting this, in the passenger seat and driving back with it?" Nappy said, "Yeah, sure, no problem. That's fine." So, I'll bring it back to, Nappy lives in Roanoke again, which I mentioned is like a half hour away from Blacksburg. So I'll just, stop by Blacksburg on the way home and drop it in the athletic department office there. So I don't know where it was, somewhere. I think he was in Virginia. He'd gotten all the way back to Virginia, and state trooper pulls over Randy King, and he was going to, I think he'd been speeding. And
he had the seatbelt. He had the seatbelt strapped over the award, right? State trooper pulls him over and peers in the driver's side window, asks for all the driver's, license, registration, insurance, all that stuff, and looks past Nappy and sees in the passenger seat this, tall 40-pound bronze trophy strapped in with the seatbelt on it. Nappy didn't want it flipping down onto the floorboard, and he's got a seatbelt across the truck. And the state trooper says, "What's that? Are you over there? What have you got in your passenger seat?" And of course, Nappy says, "Well, that's the Bronco Nagurski Award, sir." Starts a whole conversation with Nappy about the trophy and why he has the trophy and what Nappy does for a living. And turns out the trooper's a giant Virginia Tech football fan, and Nappy gets out of a ticket. Nappy ends up taking a picture with a disposable camera of the trooper standing next to but I believe the trooper took the Bronco Nagurski trophy, put it up on the hood of his cruiser, and took a picture. Nappy takes a picture of the trooper with his arm around the Bronco Nagurski Award. So he lives a life that just doesn't seem to compute to some of this, just because it just doesn't register because it is. It's just, after a while, we got to call in a lot of these stories and situations and stuff that he got involved in. Actually, he turned it himself. It was well known that when those kinds of things were going down, it was the, quote, nappy factor. There was the nappy factor involved. So nappy factor became synonymous with hijinks and shenanigans and tomfoolery, and he's the king of all that stuff. But a legendary, great dude, and likes to have a good time. That's for sure. If you hear me writing, that's the sound of me adding Randy King to my list of future podcast guests.
He'll be far more interesting than I am, man. That guy, he can tell you tales that, again, you're going to have to do a lot of editing probably on the podcast. There will be some R-rated stories on there that just won't fly, but man, he will fill up a notebook and fill up a podcast, man. He's a fascinating individual.
Is he still working?
Yeah. He's doing, he's still at the Roanoke Times, and he's doing golf. He does a lot of golf coverage, local golf, and he does some VMI, Virginia Military Institute coverage, and some other smaller college stuff. But he's loving life, man. Apparently he's in really good health, lost a lot of weight, and he's doing really well. So he's because he's had some health issues over the years and a few scares, but doing well, doing really, really well. So he's loving life, man.
Norm Wood, you've been very generous with your time today. Really, really appreciate it. Great interview, and you're a great friend, and I look forward to seeing you down the road.
Yeah, man, this is fun, Larry. Let's see if we can. I'll try to be more entertaining if you have me on again in a few years. But this was great, and let's try to hook up somewhere down the road, especially this summer if we can. I'd like to try to catch you at a few shows, see you play. I've never seen you play, man. You send me all these videos, these little clips, and I have not been able to catch you anywhere. Your listeners may not know this, but you are a damn fine drummer, man.
Thank you.
Really, really high quality drummer, and I would love to catch you somewhere. But besides all that, just to try to grab a beer sometime if I'm down in the area, which I should be at some point this summer. So let's see if we can get that done.
That sounds great, bud. Have a great rest of the summer. We'll talk to you soon.
All right, Larry. See you, man.
All right. Thanks to Norm Wood for giving us a lot of his time yesterday as we recorded that episode, that interview. Thanks to all of our generous sponsors. Our title sponsor, Parham Smith & Archenhold Law Firm in downtown Greenville. Also in Greenville, Tandem Payment over yonder in Anderson. Harris Flooring America, back over yonder this way in Clemson, right smack dab near the stadium. The Abernathy Boutique Hotel, and then down the interstate a piece, Uptown Realty LLC, not just in Sumter, but also in the PD and Eastern Midlands area. Patrick Enzer doing a great job down there. All you listeners are doing a great job of tuning in and downloading. Really appreciate that. Encourage you, if you're listening via Apple Music, to go submit a review, and that'll help further spread the word about the Clemson Dubcast. All right, that's a wrap. Everyone have a great weekend, and we'll be back next week. Take care.